Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first in our series of virtual field trips from the Soil and Water Conservation Virtual Field Trip Series here at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. My name is Chandler Arel. I serve as the climate instructor here on faculty in the Department of Crop, Soil, and Environmental Sciences at the University of Arkansas. Thank you all for joining us today as we introduce this new series that will focus on soil and water conservation efforts across the state of Arkansas. I also want to say thank you to the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Arkansas for funding and collaborating with us on this project. Today's online introductory session will include 3 guest speakers, the first being myself. We will then be joined by Mr. Jonathan Brye, a graduate student here at the University of Arkansas, and then conclude with an interview with one of our Arkansas Discovery farmers, Mr. Wes Kirkpatrick. To those of you who are joining us live, please feel free to submit questions that you have about this series or conservation practices into the Q&A bottom at the into the Q&A box at the bottom. Excuse me. With that, I believe we're ready to dive into our content and begin introducing our new series on soil and water conservation. All right, if everyone can see my screen. Like I said, today we are going to be introducing our new series on soil and water conservation through our virtual field trip series. My name is Chandler Arel, and I'm a climate instructor here at the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. So I want to begin our conversation today about what these virtual field trips are. These virtual field trips will be online, live broadcasted sessions that will be recorded and then made available on the UADA website for future viewing. The purpose of this virtual field trips is that we're aiming to provide specialized, direct technical assistance in supporting soil health, water use, and water quality practices, supporting sustainable agriculture in both row crop and livestock production, and then provide training on resilience building practices. We hope that the value that we're bringing by providing these virtual field trips is by offering these as free and easily accessible sessions. And I think that they bring value in 3 specific ways. We hope that these improve the outreach of the USDA's NRCS programs that cost share with producers in the state of Arkansas. We also hope that by making these free and easily accessible by posting them for future viewing online, that we can reduce barriers of entry for any historically underserved communities. And more generally, we hope that by having these virtual field trips covering conservation practices, we can help to connect the public to producers and try to reinforce the concept that these conservation practices have been a part and are a vital part of the producer operations in the state of Arkansas. Looking forward about what to expect from these virtual field trips, we are going to be covering quite a wide geographic area of the state of Arkansas in these virtual field trips, with many opportunities for virtual field trips within counties across the eastern portion of the state, but then also some opportunities here in Northwest Arkansas, in Benton and Washington counties. Not only is the scope of this virtual field trip geographically wide, but also we plan on covering many different topics from the perspective of conservation. You can expect in 2025 this first introductory virtual field trip, followed by a field trip looking into the science behind these conservation practices and agricultural resiliency, followed by an expansion into a virtual field trip looking at conservation practices in horticulture. We then intend to have a virtual field trip looking at rice production and the conservation practices, trying to build soil health and increase water use efficiency in rice production in Arkansas. But this doesn't just stop in 2025. We intend on having an additional 4 virtual field trips in 2026 and an additional 4 in 2027. So definitely stay tuned to see what topics might interest you into the future in this virtual field trip series. It's not only important for us to talk about what we hope to accomplish with these virtual field trips, but to talk about why we're putting so much time and effort into hosting these virtual field trips. And that first boils down to money. Arkansas agriculture is an extremely valuable industry to the state of Arkansas. It's actually our largest industry, valued at about $21 billion. We're the top producer of rice in the United States. We're second largest producer of poultry, And we're within the top 15 for all states for cotton, soybean, sorghum, and corn. Additionally, some of these virtual field trips will cover things like small-scale fruit and vegetable production due to the growing interest here in the state of Arkansas. So not only are these virtual field trips are trying to explore conservation practices for what we have and how to protect them, but we're also intending to look into these conservation practices because of what's to come. Looking forward, the future of Arkansas agriculture is absolutely being threatened by a couple of key natural resource concerns, and it's within our best interest to be prepared for those resource concerns. So these primary areas of concern, like I said, threaten the productivity and the profitability of Arkansas agriculture. And I want to first talk about water quality. Now, the US EPA has identified agriculture as a leading source of water quality degradation, but it's also been identified that there is a lack of farm-scale studies looking at nutrient management and the effect of conservation practices on water quality. Now, Arkansas is in a unique situation where we have the Arkansas Discovery Farms program, which is definitely filling this need, but I think everyone would agree with me that there's always room to improve and expand our understanding of how these conservation practices affect water quality. Second, Arkansas is concerned with what we're seeing in declining aquifer levels. Currently, the majority of Arkansas crops are irrigated in some way, and the majority of that irrigation water is from groundwater sources. But currently, the withdrawal rate, or the amount of water that we're using for irrigation, is more than the amount of water that is re-entering the aquifer for future use. Therefore, it's an unsustainable practice. And we definitely need to spend time and money and effort looking into how we can improve our irrigation water use efficiency to try to make it a sustainable practice. Third, a lot of Arkansas producers and researchers are concerned about soil degradation and are interested in trying to improve soil health in Arkansas. Now, soil health not only would be a benefit to improve for agricultural productivity by enhancing soil fertility, but it also kind of has a cascading effect and improves other areas of concern like water quality. Additionally, through those improved soil fertility characteristics, farmers have seen decreases in input costs, like decreased need for applying fertilizers. And also, soil health has been a good tool to try to enhance the resiliency of our production systems to extreme weather patterns expected to intensify due to climate change. And that brings me to my fourth and final primary area of concern, that being climate change and resiliency to it. Now, building agricultural resiliency to climate change is something that we need to spend time looking into through conservation practices because, like I said, there is an expectation that the dangerous side effects of climate change will have negative impacts on our agricultural production system. And I want to talk about those specific dangers a little bit more specifically. Now, first, there's an expectation that going into the future, due to climate change, we will have decreased summer rainfall, which would then result in prolonged drought effects and how extreme those droughts are. Additionally, there's an expectation that there will be more above average days with high temperatures, that being exceeding 95 degrees, but not going below 75 degrees in that day. Also, an expected increase in the amount of intense rainfall events, those being rainfall events greater than 1 inch. That has large ramifications for agriculture in Arkansas with the impact that that would have on flooding. Fourth, also we're expecting increased tropical storm damage. There's an expectation that small tropical storms will decrease, but we'll see an increase in the amount of large tropical storms and hurricanes that impact Arkansas agriculture, especially for crops like cotton, which are susceptible to yield loss during intense rainfall events and winds. And fifth and finally, oscillation effects like the El Nino-La Nina effect. There's an expected increase on how profound of an effect that will have on our weather patterns. And so in conjunction, all of these different dangers of climate change, I think warrant further research and education onto these climate practices going into the future to try to make our production systems more resilient to these extreme weather patterns. But I kind of want to change gears here and not talk about, what are these conservation practices? I want to talk about, where have we been doing our research, and what's kind of the state of this research in the state of Arkansas. And like I said earlier, Arkansas is kind of uniquely positioned in a good way because we have the Arkansas Discovery Farms program. The Arkansas Discovery Farms program is a stakeholder-driven conservation demonstration program in which state-of-the-art water quality monitoring systems are installed on real working farms, and then they document the environmental impacts that these conservation practices have on environmental issues such as water quality or soil health. The purpose of this is to demonstrate the potential of these NRCS-approved conservation practices and kind of verify in what systems do they work, what systems do they maybe not work. Additionally, utilizing these Arkansas Discovery Farms is of particular value and interest to us that do research, because not always when a researcher goes to a field do they know that much about maybe the climate or the soil history or the production history of that given field. But because of the Arkansas Discovery Farms program has been around since 2009, when we do conservation research on these discovery farms, we know extensive site history that is very valuable, as many of these conservation practices are long-term studies before you see much of an effect on certain indicators of maybe soil health or greenhouse gas emissions or other indicators. But with utilizing the Arkansas Discovery Farms program, we do have 3 specific objectives of what we'd like to accomplish through this collaboration. The first is conducting on-farm demonstrations and monitoring to assess the need and effectiveness of these conservation practices. We really need to think about, before we are recommending these for different production systems or to different parts of Arkansas, we need to feel confident as researchers that we're recommending good decisions for these farmers. So by conducting research and monitoring, we can improve our confidence in these conservation practices. Second, we then hope to provide on-farm verification, like I said, and document nutrient and sediment loss reductions or the benefits of these conservation practices, also in water conservation, in support of our nutrient management planning and to improve our environmental farm stewardship. Third and finally, we hope to develop and deliver educational programs from on-farm data that will then assist producers in the future in achieving both their production and environmental goals in support of sustainable farming. So with that, I want to shift gears again and look at what have we actually been doing, what have we been doing in the field to try to build our confidence in these conservation practices. Up in the University of Arkansas in our research lab group, we've been trying to build a comprehensive kind of baseline and expand into all of the major production systems in the state of Arkansas, so that we can not only understand these conservation practices, but try to understand which ones specifically work in which production systems and try to make it unique to each production system itself. So far, we have done work in pasture land. We have 2 different master's students looking at soil moisture in pastures, comparing different rotations. We've done research in corn, looking at cover crop and a no cover crop and a really unique automated multi-day measurement system. We've also had students conduct research in cotton, looking at different biochar rate applications, also looking at the effect of different cover cropping and tillage effects versus no cover crop and conventional tillage effects. Similarly, we've had a very similar project, but in soybean. So again, that was looking at cover crops with reduced tillage compared to no cover crop with conventional tillage. Also in soybean, a no-till system with and without cover crop. And finally, we've also done extensive greenhouse gas work in rice. Most recently, we had a study in which we looked at type and rate of biochar in a simulated irrigated rice system that we had in a greenhouse up here in Northwest Arkansas. So like I said, the point of us trying to expand this research into so many different production systems is so that we can make recommendations in the future for all of the diverse different systems that we have in the state of Arkansas, instead of just having a really good understanding of a single system. So it's really trying to round out as a research group what we can converse about intelligently when it comes to these different conservation practices. So with that, I have three main conclusions or takeaways that I want to drive home about my presentation today. The first being that I think these virtual field trips are really valuable because of the accessible education that they hope to offer in these Arkansas conservation efforts. Additionally, Arkansas agriculture is objectively facing major threats, but by researching these conservation practices, that increases our ability to collaborate, and then we can work together to try to solve these problems going into the future. And third and finally, like I said, collaboration is really key in these conservation practices. And we hope that by offering virtual field trips like this and collaborating with producers through Arkansas Discovery Farms, we can try to bring the science of this from the lab to the public and to the producers to try to make it as useful as possible. So with that, I want to say thank you all for listening to my presentation. And now I will turn it over to Jonathan Brye so we can hear a little bit more about these conservation practices specifically. Jonathan Brye is a graduate student here at the University of Arkansas, working towards his master's degree in crop, soil, and environmental sciences. His presentation will introduce some of the most popular conservation practices used in row crop agriculture here in Arkansas, and he will explain how and why these practices are encouraged for Arkansas farmers. I want to remind you all that if you have any questions about our session today, please leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jonathan, to hear about conservation in Arkansas.
Thanks, Chandler. Now, conservation practices in Arkansas. I'll explain what conservation practices are, what's common in Arkansas, and then I'll specifically break down cover crops, conservation tillage, nutrient and irrigation management systems that are geared towards soil and water conservation, and I'll wrap up with some key takeaways. So, conservation practices are generally considered to be any practice that restores or protects natural resources. And these natural resources are generally considered to be soil, water, air, or greenhouse gases, how those impact the atmosphere. And cover crops that are commonly used in Arkansas include a cover crop, which is just a crop planted during the off season to provide soil cover. Conservation tillage, which is a form of reducing tillage, maintaining crop residue. Nutrient and irrigation management systems that are geared towards conserving soil, water, or decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. And then buffer strips, which are these planted vegetated strips on the edge of fields or in riparian areas, which are the transition zones from upland areas to a stream. These can help reduce surface runoff, increase infiltration, and then biochar, which is a form of heated organic material that can be applied as an organic amendment to the soil that has numerous soil and water conservation properties that make it beneficial for agriculture. And then the three that I'm specifically going to break down today: cover crops, conservation tillage, and then nutrient and irrigation management. So, cover crops. These are crops planted either during a fallow period or between cash crops. And the goal of a cover crop is to reduce the soil erosion that occurs and also hold on to water near the soil surface. In Arkansas, there's only about 2% of Arkansas cropland that's planted with a cover crop. So that's a fairly low amount of Arkansas acreage. But that equates to about 270,000 acres. This was from 2022. And that's an increase by 20,000 acres from 2017. So despite the low overall percentage, we are seeing an increase in cover crop usage in Arkansas. And common cover crops include winter cereals like wheat, oats, cereal, rye, which is what I have an image of in the top right screen. Winter broadleaves like radish, turnip, and then winter legumes. And each of these cover crops have their own unique purpose or benefits for whatever your intended use is for them. For example, winter cereals have this tillering aspect to them and do a good job covering the soil to prevent soil erosion. And winter cereals also usually have a deeper, faster growing root system, which could allow nutrients near the soil surface to be captured so they aren't lost by leaching through groundwater. And then winter broadleaves are good at breaking up a compacted layer, and winter legumes have this ability to make their own nitrogen, which could increase your soil nitrogen levels through the non-growing season. And cover crops have specific impacts on soil, water, and greenhouse gas properties. Specifically in the soil, we'd expect with a cover crop reduced soil erosion, which is highlighted pretty well in that image here. On the left, you have no cover crop. On the right, you have a radish cover crop. And as you can see, over the growing season, the no cover crop experienced a lot more soil erosion than the with cover crop area. An increase in organic matter from the above ground matter of the cover crop and the root matter, that's all going to decompose and be incorporated into the soil. And this also helps improve soil structure. With the water specifically, decreased runoff is typically seen with a cover crop because the water is going to be able to infiltrate better. You'll also see absorption of nutrients that are left in the profile that are less likely to end up in a groundwater source or even run off if they're still on the soil surface because the cover crop is going to absorb those nutrients. And then an increase in soil water retention is a huge benefit to incorporating a cover crop. Cover crops are usually really beneficial and can result in a significant yield increase if used in a non-irrigated field, just because that field is going to retain so much more moisture even after the cover crop has been terminated. And then for greenhouse gas emissions, cover crops could reduce methane and nitrous oxide emissions. This is because with methane, anaerobic conditions are less likely to occur with a cover crop, and nitrous oxide emissions are likely not going to occur if the nitrogen sources have been absorbed by the cover crop. And another important consideration is that cover crops could complicate weed and pest management. So those are just other things to consider when including or considering a cover crop. Another frequently used conservation practice in Arkansas is conservation tillage, which is generally defined, or I guess specifically defined, as any tillage system that maintains at least 30% residue cover and reduces tillage operations. I put an asterisk by that 30% because to fully understand or to fully see the benefits of conservation tillage, 30% is just kind of an arbitrary number. More residue cover might be necessary if you're in an arid region, or even less might be possible, but that's just dependent on the production system. And similar to cover crops, we're seeing an increased use in conservation tillage practices. Specifically, there were about 23,000 more acres under no tillage in 2022 compared to 2017, and then 379,000 less acres under conventional tillage practices. So we're seeing an increase in conservation tillage practices in Arkansas. And it's important to mention that conservation tillage is sort of an umbrella term, and that includes practices like reduced or minimum tillage, like if you just formed and flattened beds, that's a form of conservation tillage if you include an element of crop residue cover. No tillage, so if you decide not to till at all, that is a form of conservation tillage. And then strip tillage, where you're only going to till in the rows, the areas that you're going to want to plant. And then mulch tillage, where you're only incorporating just this upper shallow area of the soil surface to try to incorporate that crop residue into the top soil. Specific benefits of conservation tillage practices include soil benefits, for example, reduced soil erosion, improved soil structure, and less organic matter breakdown is expected with conservation tillage practices. The reduced soil erosion is because the soil, when it's tilled less, is going to have improved soil structure, making it less likely to be washed off with rainfall, and that soil is going to remain intact better. And then another important facet of conservation tillage is that the soil organic matter is maintained. So under conventional tillage, You have the soil particles, the soil PEDs, that structure is almost completely broken, and that leaves soil organic matter much more prone to decomposition or loss mechanisms than conservation tillage would have. So impacts on water include increased infiltration. That improved soil structure is going to leave more pore space in the soil for water to enter the soil instead of running off. Decreased evaporation because water is going to be able to quickly and further into a soil, so that water is going to be able to penetrate deeper, making it less likely to evaporate. And then greenhouse gas emissions for conservation tillage impact are, we expect to see a decrease in carbon dioxide emissions because that soil organic matter is not going to be broken down at the same rate as it would be under conventional tillage. And then another consideration is that there are less production costs associated with reduced tillage. The less passes that a producer has to make on a field, that's going to save for fuel costs, any other maintenance associated with the tillage implement, that is going to be another benefit of conservation tillage. All right, now nutrient and water management. These practices can be geared towards soil, water, greenhouse gas conservation. And these specifically include like what nutrient and irrigation management plan are you using? So with irrigation in Arkansas specifically, flood and furrow make up about 86% of all irrigation practices in Arkansas. Flood irrigation being predominantly because Arkansas is the leading rice producing state in the United States. And then similar to what Chandler mentioned earlier, 80% of Arkansas irrigation comes from groundwater. So that means that groundwater source is of concern when evaluating irrigation systems. And Arkansas specifically ranks third in all of the continental United States in irrigation volume. So that means that Arkansas producers irrigate more than almost any other state in the United States. And then for nutrient management, this can also be geared towards soil and water conservation, but the general recommendation is, do you follow the 4 R's of nutrient management, which if you haven't heard those before, using the right nutrient source, using the right rate, the right time, and the right place to maximize that nutrient use efficiency. So what are the nutrient and water management impacts on soil and water? Well, if proper nutrient management, proper irrigation management is followed or geared towards soil and water conservation, this will prevent nutrient losses and improve efficiency. If you're fertilizing at the right rate, then you're not going to have nutrient losses just from either surface runoff or that excess nutrients leaching through the soil profile and into the groundwater. With water, reduced nutrient runoff is absolutely a benefit that comes with proper nutrient management practices and proper irrigation. So excess nutrient application is going to result in some of those nutrients just running off of the soil surface. And if that's combined with irrigating too much or excess rainfall, then you'll see a lot of that is run off of the field just as a result of the management practices. And improved water use efficiency is a huge focus of your irrigation system. If you switch from a flood irrigated system to a furrow irrigated system, you'll see a reduction in the amount of water used in a growing season without a major impact on yield. So that's a management system that could be geared to use less water, which all of this is ultimately really important for Arkansas because reduced groundwater withdrawal is a concern for future generations. The rates of Arkansas aquifer depletion is occurring faster than Arkansas aquifers can recharge. So if we can limit the amount of water pulled from the aquifer, that might allow some of that water to recharge in the aquifer. Greenhouse gas emissions are also impacted by nutrient and water management systems. Specifically, you could use a nitrogen urease inhibitor to slowly release nitrogen fertilizers. That way, nitrous oxide isn't produced at as great a rate. A switch from flood irrigation to furrow irrigation significantly reduces methane emissions just because anaerobic conditions, ponded conditions aren't existing in the field. So these are all things to consider when evaluating conservation practices in Arkansas. So for some final key takeaways to wrap up my presentation, there's only about 50% of Arkansas crop acreage that utilizes one single conservation practice. So that means that the land area where conservation practices could be implemented is quite vast in Arkansas. And it's not just implementing one conservation practice thinking, oh, I might try to just pick one and I'll implement it, but a combination of conservation practices are going to improve that crop system's ability to withstand severe weather events like increased levels of drought or flooding. The combination of conservation practices like a reduced tillage regime, a cover crop, some sort of biochar application, or even a buffer strip. The combination of that is where you'll see the maximum ability for a crop to withstand these severe weather events. And then I won't go without saying that anytime a production system is going to transition to something new, there are going to be challenges associated with that implementation. Some specific examples are if a producer wants to switch from their conventional tillage to no tillage, there's a large initial investment that's going to come with acquiring the proper equipment to execute that tillage practice effectively. And then a learning curve. If someone is going from a conventional tillage practice or any practice that they've been doing for decades and then want to make a change, there's going to be a lot of information, a lot of equipment that's going to need to be understood before that practice can be executed effectively. And then the last implementation challenge that I'll mention is that there are transitional yield risks. Anytime that a agro ecosystem is essentially shifted out of what it's naturally balanced or naturally equilibrated to do, it's going to take some time for the microorganisms, the soil nutrients to return to a value or a level that is optimum for whatever crop is being produced. So there might be some risk in these transitional from conventional practices to conservation practices. So with that, that's the conclusion of my presentation, and I'll let Chandler transition us over to Wes Kirkpatrick's interview.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, for the great presentation and for all the information that you had to offer. At this point, I will go ahead and transition us into our interview with Mr. Wes Kirkpatrick. Wes Kirkpatrick is an Arkansas farmer located in Deshay County, producing row crops such as soybean, cotton, and corn. Wes has a long history with the Division of Agriculture, having served as a county agent before transitioning into the lead role at his family-owned farm. With a history of extension, Wes has prioritized responsible land ownership, implementing various soil and water conservation practices on his farm. Additionally, Wes's farm has served as an Arkansas Discovery Farm for over 14 years, allowing numerous research projects the opportunity to collect invaluable data at a real production system. Both Jonathan and I have actually conducted countless hours of research on Wes's farm, collecting soil, plant, and greenhouse gas data, and we're very thankful for the opportunities that we've had to work with him. I do want to remind any of you watching that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom. And with that, let's go ahead and see what Mr. Kirkpatrick had to say.
C.B. Stevens Farms has been in existence since the 1940s, I believe. My wife's grandfather started the farm back then, and this farm has typically grown cotton, soybeans, and corn. Used to grow some rice, but we haven't grown rice in several years. We've been a discovery farm for a long time, and of course with that has brought a lot of different projects and researchers on our farm, and they're always welcome here because we know the data and the information that is collected is needed and useful and good or bad, you know. So we've always had a good relationship with the University of Arkansas, and to the extent where a lot of times there's lots of stuff going on my farm that I don't even know that's going on because it's an open door. I mean, if researchers need to do something, they'll call and say, hey, can we do this? And I say, absolutely, just keep me informed so that, you know, we're not in each other's way. So, but we've always had a good relationship. The whole reason for the Discovery Farm to begin with was to see how our fertility programs were we over fertilizing and wasting fertilizer and running off and causing issues in surface water. And I know my father-in-law was nervous about that because he didn't know. And the biggest surprise to me was whenever that data started coming in, it was showing that what we were applying was being used by the crop, and we were losing very little of it through the runoff. So that really instilled in me that because as a farmer, it's also a business, and we don't want to spend money and not even thinking about the environmental impact of fertilizer runoff. But from a financial impact, we don't want to over-apply something because it costs us money that we don't need to be spending. So I've just basically taken the ball that he started running with, I grabbed it and I'm still running with it because he created a lot of these things and started a lot of these practices on our farm, and I know the benefits of them, so there's no reason for me to change it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So if we pick up a new farm, or if we have a new well put down, or any change happens on any of our irrigation, we won't lay pipe until we have a pipe plan for that field, not just on Discovery Farm, but on every field on my farm. So, that's, I guess, one impact that has been long-lasting, and it takes the guesswork out of irrigation. We're not wasting as much water as we used to because we're irrigating more efficiently by using a pipe planter program. Through the Discovery Farm, and Mike Hamilton wrote a grant for some automated irrigation technology, and we've implemented that on a couple of the Discovery Farm fields. And using a cell phone, I can turn on and off a well anywhere in the world as long as I've got a cell phone signal. So, and that came to our farm through Discovery Farm. It's an expensive thing, so I haven't jumped out there and put that in practice on a lot of acres just because of the cost associated with it. But it's something that there is a very good benefit to that, and you just have to get started financially to make it work. Perry Wilson, he's one of our main guys. He's the one that I actually let him take care of this automated irrigation stuff, and he loves it because it takes away his workload. He can look on his phone and see that the irrigation is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and so that frees him up to do something else. He doesn't have to go to the field and make sure everything's right, and then when it's time to turn it off, he turns it off. It'll swap from one set to the next without him having to go to the field. So, he really likes that, and he wants me to buy it for every field. But again, it's pretty good cost associated with that. A group's putting some biochar work in on one of our fields. There's greenhouse gas emission measurements going on based on different practices that we're doing. So, all those things are intriguing to me because they potentially could be beneficial to me as a farmer. It seems like the Discovery Farm group is out front anyway, thinking about these things that need to be thought about and then putting the effort into getting some data for those different things. If you're pumping water, you're spending money to pump that water. So if you're using that water more efficiently and not having to pump as much, that's a financial savings. Same with fertilizer. If you're only applying what you need, and we know we're not losing a lot of it, so we are about where we need to be on fertility. So, yeah, all those things are they verify that the practices that we're putting in place are economically viable as well. We don't plant our whole farm with a cover crop because it doesn't fit everywhere. We have quite a few acres of non-irrigated fields, and I feel like those always get a cover crop because I feel like the higher organic matter that brings to the field helps water management. Make better use of what rainfall we do get. But on fields where we have a limited irrigation water availability, we'll plant cover crops because of the help it brings for making better use of what water you do have. I have tried blends before, but I typically like a single species cover, and that's typically a cereal rye. And the reason for that is it's easy to manage, easy to terminate it, it's easy to get established, has a good root growth system. It just seems to be the easiest for us. So again, we planted on a lot of acres, anywhere from 500 to 1,500 acres every year. Just in the fall dictates that too. I mean, if it's a late fall harvest wise, I don't want to plant my cover crop too late because I don't get any benefit from it because it doesn't get the growth that I want. Like this behind us here was planted at just about the perfect time. We got the perfect rainfall on it, and it looks like it. I mean, we've got a really good stand out there. And most all of my cover crop this year did really well. It takes you a few years to figure out how to best fit it for your operation too. It's not a cure-all, and it doesn't fix everything. Cover crops don't. So we can't truly be no-till because we furrow irrigate, and we have to have a furrow to irrigate down. And in years when we have a wet harvest season, we leave fields in bad shape, so we have to be in a tillage system to get those beds back to where we can water them the next year. So we can't truly be in a no-till, but we try to be minimum till everywhere we can. Now, corn is a different animal because I like to have that debris back in the soil. So with my corn acres is typically conventional tillage because I till that debris, that stubble back into the soil. Some people burn it. I don't want to burn it. I want all that organic matter back in my field. So, but cotton is, if I'm going to be in cotton in the same field for several years, I will be in a stale seed bed where we re-hip the bed after harvest in the fall. So some of these fields it's the same bed that's been there for 10 years. Soybeans, I will do soybeans no-till if we have a dry fall and we leave the field in good shape with the harvest equipment. I probably have 1,000 acres of soybean ground this year that we'll plant no-till. So because we had a dry fall last fall. So that's kind of my we try to be minimum till or no-till everywhere we can, but we can't truly be no-till everywhere because of how we irrigate. So, you think about when you go to the grocery store, you're spending 20% more for the same stuff. Well, it's no different on the farm. And then last year our commodity prices fell out, and so we're spending more money for the same stuff, getting paid less for what we're making, and that puts us all in a bind. And if my kids want to farm, I want them to be successful at it, and I don't want to. And for the landowners that I farm for, I don't want to abuse their land. I want it to be a long-term relationship that's beneficial to both sides. I'm making a crop and trying to make a living on it, paying them for allowing me to do that, and I want it to be mutually beneficial. So you have to take care of it because there's not any more land being made.
All right. Great hearing from Mr. Kirkpatrick in that interview. I definitely always think that hearing from the farmers that are on the forefront of this conversation on soil and water conservation is always such a treat. So I do want to say a special thank you to Wes Kirkpatrick for all he's done and all the opportunities that we've had to work with him. But with that, I believe that we are ready to answer any questions that may have came up during our session today.
Yes, for sure. We have some questions here in the chat. This question is for either Chandler or Jonathan. What conservation practices do you specifically work with?
Jonathan, would you like to answer that one?
For sure. The conservation practices that we specifically work with are cover crops, conservation, reduced tillage, and biochar applications. Those are generally what we work with for row crop production, and then we have some managed pasture land prairie systems that we also work in that have conservation practices for animal agriculture.
Thank you, Jonathan. I have another question. It seems to be for Chandler. What are some of the key factors influencing farmer decisions to implement soil conservation practices?
Yeah, I think that Wes talked about this a little bit in the interview, but I mean, agriculture is a business, and these conservation practices have to make sense first economically, or if they're not making sense economically, then you won't even be putting yourself in a position to make those decisions if you put yourself out of business. So I do really think that the number one thing I've heard from producers is it comes down to, does it make sense for them economically? But then also, a lot of them want to know more about how is this going to affect my soil? How effective is it going to be at building my soil health? What kind of savings can I have through implementing these practices? So I do think a lot of it really revolves around one, the economics, and two, how comfortable they feel with, how much do they actually know about implementing the practice.
Thank you, Chandler. I have another question here. It can be answered by any one of you. Also, if Deirdre is in the meeting, we explain how biochar helps with conservation.
I can answer that. Biochar has multiple impacts on conservation. Biochar is a carbon source, so when incorporated or added to a soil, that is a relatively stable carbon source that can remain there for a longer period of time than your crop residue or other organic additions to a soil. And that organic matter, that biochar is storing carbon in the soil, but it's also helping to hold on to moisture, hold on to nutrients. So those are some of the understood conservation benefits or potential benefits associated with biochar.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is there something else that Chandler probably wants to add?
I think Jonathan's covered pretty much all of the main benefits of biochar. It's still relatively new in the research world, and so I do think, further research into what systems does it make sense in, what kind of rates does it make sense to apply, how does it, how is it affordable economically for what it does for your farm? There's still a lot of questions that have begun to been answered by researchers and different groups, but I think there's definitely room to improve on what kind of answers and costs, kind of answers we can give producers when it comes to biochar.
Chandler, I have another question. When it comes to soil health and greenhouse gas emissions, what areas of research do you think there is room to grow and improve current research?
Yeah, when it comes to soil health and greenhouse gas emissions, I do definitely think that one, we can continue to expand our sampling of soils across the state. I think a first good step would be to have a lot of baseline data from, Northeast Arkansas all the way down to South Arkansas of, okay, what kind of soil health do we have in the state? Like where are we kind of starting from? I also think that there's room to move into more into soil health and greenhouse gas emissions research outside of row crop agriculture. We have a lot of pasture and hay land in the state of Arkansas. One of our top industry is forestry. I think we could definitely do more to get a better understanding about, how can we kind of quantify and get some information about what's going on outside of just row crop agriculture. So I definitely think there are areas that we could expand into and continue to grow.
I do have another question here. Seems to be for Jonathan. How could someone reach out for more information about conservation practices?
If somebody is interested in more information on conservation practices, the number one thing that I'd recommend, especially if you're a producer, is to reach out to your local county extension office. The personnel there should be informed on what conservation practices can be implemented, best ways to implement them, cost share programs that are maybe available. And then also, research on an internet search could help also provide a lot of information. There's a lot of fact sheets available, information from universities about conservation practices. So that's one route that I would recommend someone go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jonathan. I do have another question. Do you study any organic or vegetable farms?
At the moment, I don't believe that we have any study sites in vegetable or organic farming. That's, back to the last question I answered there. There's definitely room to expand into, other kind of crop production systems that we haven't worked in the past, like horticulture plots. There's definitely room to see what impact this organic farming is having on overall soil health and its greenhouse gas emissions. So as of right now, no, I would say maybe it's understudied when it comes to, what we're specifically talking about here. But there's room. There's definitely room to expand into organic farming.
Let me just
You follow-
continue on Chandler's explanation there about organic farms. My name is Chris Brye. I'm a university professor of applied soil physics and pedology here at the University of Arkansas in the Division of Agriculture. We have done some conservation work in organic apple orchards as a historic land use that has been here in Northwest Arkansas. But as Chandler alluded to, there's definitely been very little that has been done. We've looked at various practices on a tree by tree basis that relate to residue management. We've looked at soil nutrients, infiltration, some of the other conservation practices that Jonathan spoke about. But the organic farms, for sure, and in particular vegetable cropping, has not received a lot of attention from a conservation practice standpoint thus far.
Mhm. Thank you, Dr. Brye. How does one become a discovery farm?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Well, my first step in discovering being an Arkansas Discovery Farm would be absolutely to get in contact with Dr. Mike Daniels. He's actually in our meeting here today. He's the head of the Arkansas Discovery Farms program. And so by getting in contact with him, he would definitely be able to provide more information about, what the program has to offer. From my understanding, it's fairly easy to become a member of the Arkansas Discovery Farms program. They're very welcoming to, introducing new land into their program, expanding their collaborations. And so that would be my answer to that is, just reach out to Dr. Mike Daniels, and he definitely can extend more information about becoming an Arkansas Discovery Farm.
Thank you, Chandler. This is a question seems to be for Jonathan. How does one implement, no, excuse me, this one, the chat was passing by. How do these practices, I think it's conservation practices, affect soil and carbon?
Yeah, the conservation practices that I specifically talked about, the conservation tillage, implementing cover crops, and then to some extent, the irrigation management also impacts soil carbon. But specifically with conservation tillage and cover crops, you'd expect to see an increase in soil carbon because as with a cover crop, that organic matter is going to end up back in the soil at the end of the growing season. So that's going to increase the soil organic matter, increase soil carbon. And then with conservation tillage, the structure of the soil is going to be maintained. The organic matter in the soil is going to be attached to that greater part of a soil structure. And that helps the soil organic matter to essentially be preserved in the soil and not as easy to break down. So we would expect to see an increase in soil organic carbon with both of those practices.
Thank you, Jonathan. I have room for a couple of more questions that are here. So, how does one implement no-till practices on their land?
Well, I guess the one of the most attractive things about no-till practices is that it's really more so the lack, and this is what I've heard is one of the favorite things from producers I've worked with, is that it's actually the lack of doing anything. The implementing a no-till system has, of course, more nuance than that. But the first step, is obviously not to till that field. And so looking into, okay, before I implement this practice, maybe I need to assess the soil specifically for any kind of physical or chemical concern, like, does this field have a history of problems with compaction? Is this field going to be a good candidate for no-till practices based on what crop I'm going to be planting? So there are a lot of considerations going into, and Wes certainly talked about this as a producer that has no-till on his farm, and it's, he has to assess every single field and whether it's a good candidate or not based on, a lot of different soil, physical, and chemical kind of parameters. And so that would be, I think, the first step in implementing a no-till practice would be first figuring out, does it even make sense for this certain production system on this certain soil? And then going from there, moving forward, you can begin to, maybe pick cover crops that are favorable towards no-till practices, or, kind of gearing towards things like that.
Could we get Wes Kirkpatrick to talk about how he implemented no-till?
Certainly, yeah, Wes, if you'd like to chime in, go ahead.
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer, Mike, because like I say, I mean, as long as I've been farming, I try to be no-till where I can, but I can't truly be that way because of how we irrigate. So, I like Chandler said, I have to, it's a field by field decision every year. And if I can not put a tractor across the field, I don't want to. I think a lot of people like the old school mentality that they want to turn the dirt over, and because they think it looks pretty, or they like the smell, or this, that, and the other. Well, I'd prefer not to do that because I don't want to spend the money if I don't have to. So I just have to field by field, make a decision every year what I need to do to that field, if anything.
Wes,
Yeah.
can you address how it would change your weed control program and or equipment that you use?
Okay, yeah. Well, from a weed control standpoint, I feel like no-till makes weed control easier because you're not turning the soil over and opening up new seed from out of the seed bed. Especially considering weeds like the pigweed, they just produce millions of seeds, and if you don't keep turning the soil over, you can kind of get ahead of them. So I like from a weed control aspect, I like no-till. The biggest weed that we have in no-till system is ryegrass, perennial ryegrass, which is hard to kill. You can't kill it with hardly anything. So that's one of the monsters that we have to deal with in no-till. But from an equipment standpoint, we really don't have anything any different than any other conventional tillage farmer would have. So I don't have any specialized equipment for no-till.
Thank you. Due to time constraints, we will need to wrap up with the questions and answer session.
All right. Well, we appreciate all of your questions today. And, of course, if you have more questions, you can reach out to someone on our team, and I'm sure they'll get it answered. But I want to say thank you all very much for joining us today for the introduction of our new soil and water conservation trip series. Make sure to be on the lookout in the future for future emails, social media posts for our upcoming virtual field trip series. I want to say thank you to Jonathan Brye and Wes Kirkpatrick for providing their expertise on their topics today, NRCS for funding this project, and to all of our colleagues at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture for assisting in organizing this event. Thank you all, and we hope to see you next time at our Soil and Water Conservation Virtual Field Trip Series.
Thank you for joining us for the Soil and Water Conservation Virtual Field Trip. This broadcast is funded by NRCS and produced by the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service.